Making sure. Okay, it looks like we are live. And yay, we are live. Wonderful. Everything's working as it should be. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. I have a wonderful guest, and I would love to introduce her. We have Evita Sawyers, and Evita is a Black queer polyamorous non-monogamy educator, speaker, guide, and author. She was a subject of a documentary called Poly Love. She's passionate about helping people navigate the transition from monogamy to non-monogamy and avoiding the common beginner pitfalls. So, welcome, Evita. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. If the
Yeah.
teaser that we got before we came on is any indicator, it should be a good one.
Yes, yes. I know your normal passion topic is around polyamory or non-monogamy, but when we chatted before, what really was kind of alive in you with was the subject of grief, and this is our topic for today. So, and I also really resonated with that as well because I felt I was going through a bit of a grief process very recently. And I love that you're ready to chat about that as well, particularly grief after divorce.
Yes.
So maybe you can kind of orient us to what you think. Like, how do you view grief? Like, what is the sort of how do you define grief for yourself?
How do I define grief for myself? Oh my gosh, I just read like a really, really, really good quote on grief. And I was like, yeah, that's what it is.
Mm,
Because I think when we think of grief, we automatically think of like somebody dying, you know?
yes, sure.
And so that's really like the only place that we like allow the application of that, of the like grief or like the adjective, or I guess or whatever. Oh, that
Mm-hmm.
person is
Mm-hmm.
grieving because their, partner passed or their mom died or something. And for me, it felt so small and it felt so limiting because loss is an experience that we have for a variety of things, not just related to people dying.
Yeah. Yes.
And to me, I feel like almost every experience of loss comes with the emotion of grief in some form or fashion. And when we only restrict grief to the instance of like a person dying, it makes it really hard to name grief in all of the other areas that it shows up in our
Mm.
lives.
Oh, how beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so there's a author who was African spiritualist from the Dagara tribe. His name was Maladoma Patrice Some, and he made this thing about said something about grief and how grief must be approached as a release of the tension created by separation and disconnection from someone or something that matters.
Hmm.
So for me, grief is like the process of moving through the experience of loss.
Hmm.
Um,
And the poignancy of that loss, I think,
and the
recognizing,
poignancy of that loss intensifies that process of grief.
hmm.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. When you describe it like that, um, there's something inherently sacred about this. It's not just sadness, like situational sadness. It implies a sense of I am shifting because this is happening. Like I am different now because this is happening.
Right. And
And
I love that you brought that up because I think that even as I'm sitting here reflecting on it, I think that we think that all grief is sad.
mm, yeah.
And I think when we approach our like definition of grief as a process, we can allow for other experiences of grief that aren't always sadness.
Mm,
So like this
mm,
there's I feel like there can be relief in grief.
yeah.
There can be anger in grief. There can be happiness in grief, and that one can be a really, really hard one for people
Mm,
to grapple with. It's like I'm a little there. There's some happiness that this thing is gone, And that can be
Mm,
really, really hard for people to grapple with. And so I think when we look at grief as an overall process and not focus it on a specific experience of emotion, we can sort of allow for our relationship with grief to be much more well-rounded, much more diverse.
mm, yes, multidimensional. Yeah, indeed.
Mhm.
When you said that, I was kind of reminded of my father's death, and he had a really long decline. And when he finally died, there was a mixture of like, finally, the relief that I actually could mourn this. Like it was like a 15 years in the making almost. And then when he did pass, I could finally sort of exhale a little bit and say, like, I can actually now go through this grief process. So it was a bit of those mixed emotions of like, okay, this is over, and now I can kind of really submerge myself in this next part of the journey. So I'm glad that you sort of reminded me of that.
Right, and that people can experience a lot of guilt,
Yeah.
in that space, which is interesting, because I remember one of the things that I struggled with, when my former partner, my spouse broke up with me, as I could tell that he was relieved.
Mm,
I could tell that he was relieved by the
mm,
relationship ending, and I was devastated, so
mm,
I could not hold, the awareness that he was relieved, and I would almost lash out at that relief, because I was like, I'm not feeling any of that, and this shouldn't be here. And it made me not really like hold that he also had his own process of grief that he
mhm,
was going to, even as relief was present. That he
mhm,
was also sad, and he was also scared, and there were all these other layers, and flavors of emotional experiences to pepper his grief.
yeah,
But I just focused on he was feeling the relief. And like I said, there's that guilt of going, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I should be, when it comes up.
yeah.
Whereas if we have a more well-rounded a viewpoint of like what grief is, we can allow space for all the emotions that surface to sort of sit at the table and say, you all belong here.
Yes. And I think to your point, grief is a sort of its own journey of differing emotions, um, like sadness and anger. And I know there's a multi-step process within grief. And there's this beautiful woman, Mirabai Sar. She calls them portals, right? Like, so there's this anger portal that you kind of meet yourself, and you meet the anger and all the things that you didn't get to do, and like how this person has wronged you and this and that, and then the sadness of the bereft nature of like the aloneness that you feel. And that, so grief really holds, so is like this big bowl of contradicting paradoxical emotions. And instead of really sort of deciphering it, it's almost like you have to sort of surrender to, like, I can't really, such a paradox, I cannot figure it out, I have to sort of surrender to everything and just kind of be awash in it.
Right. Yeah. Actually, I did a grief workshop during COVID online with the Philosophical Research Society, and they talked about some of the Doggerel like views on grief as water. And you
Hmm.
have to let water flow. And I've heard, several people talk about, I think Ram Dass has a quote where he talks about grief as like a wave, and it
Hmm.
washes over you again and again. And it does. It's this wave of all kinds of emotion, and water represents emotion. So
Hmm.
it's a wave of all kinds of emotions, and then the tide goes out, and the tide comes in, and the waves are strong sometimes, and the waves are very mild, and sometimes the sea is flat. But yeah, it's so many things, and when we have these really limited ideas for what it can be, we don't really welcome the fullness of the grief experience.
And you're bringing up this, when we don't allow it to be kind of this full nature. I think oftentimes we feel some kind of societal pressure to sort of like wrap it up, like, oh, it's been 3 months since your dad died, or 3 months since your divorce, or 3 months since your illness. And there's an inherent discomfort in um, this, how people talk about grief, how you handle a friend that's going through grief. People feel very uncomfortable. And I think that's one of the challenges of navigating grief, is that you don't often feel supported from the outside. And I would love for you to talk about that a little bit. if you'd
Well,
like to. Yeah.
yeah, I would love to, because I feel like it's twofold and there's a lot of layers to that too. I think that part of the reason why we're not created, we don't have space to grieve, is it's almost the honestly, I feel like it's the wounding actually really of colonialism.
Mm,
It's the wounding of colonialism, it's the wounding of capitalism. The more marginalized you are, the more space that you don't have to grieve. I think, I
I
don't think
see.
we always had a wrap it up mentality about grief. Like I said, I did that workshop. I read a book about Maladoma Padre-Some, and he was talking about grief rituals, and our indigenous cultures, they had whole grief rituals and whole
Mm,
ceremonies, and community grief was a thing, and space was created to grieve. And then we got these capitalist societies, colonialism happened, and now it's like, okay, like you have to wrap this grief up because we got to get back to living. You got to go
mm,
back to work, you got to go back to earning money, you have to go back to doing all these things. And the sort of sanitization of expression of emotion. And so just space was taken away to grieve. And so I don't know that that's necessarily, I don't know that if humans left to their own devices and not having all these systems at play,
mm,
if that would have been how we had developed. I also do believe though that there is some merit to I don't want to say allowing people to or making people have to wrap up grief quickly, but impressing upon a person that we have to figure out how to continue on with life while carrying this.
yeah.
And sometimes some of what you're seeing is not really someone like saying, okay, well, wrap it up your grief. It's like, okay, like how do I inspire this person, or how do I encourage this person to not get so caught down in mired in this grief that they stop living.
Mm,
And so everything in the human experience to me is dual. So it's like, how do I allow myself the space to feel this and to go through this process, and also how do I not let this process become all encompassing,
yeah.
so that I can continue to move on, because you can get so mucked down and mired down and living in grief that you don't move on. And I do think that there is merit in someone kind of reaching their hand out to you and saying, hey, let me help you continue walking as you're carrying this
Mm,
thing. But
yeah.
our movements through trying to do that for each other come from a space of a lot of wounding,
Hmm.
and also are very clumsy. I think that it's hard to engage a person on their grief empathetically, because you have to connect with your own grief in your
Grief.
life. And a lot of people really, they shy away from that space. And so they almost
Hmm.
want you to wrap up your process because they want to be more distant from their own,
Yeah. And
And so a
indeed.
lot of that is that too.
Yeah, you're right. The discomfort really comes from their own reluctance to look and hold their own grief. You
Hmm.
said something around colonialism and capitalism, and what came to me, which was like, this didn't happen, but like maybe anecdotally, people like if you are work in the workforce and like someone dies, you get certain amount of days off, and they're like, so I'm so sorry about your loss. And when are you coming back to work?
Right,
Like there's,
right. When are you coming
but
back to
but
work?
like
Like,
in the drop down like of things why you're like bereavement loss or something like that, there is no probably divorce thing where like you get a few days off for your divorce. And so like there's a like we were kind of pulling it back to this divorce because grief is an extremely large topic just in that space, which is like you could tell people you're getting a divorce, like your coworkers or something, and people be like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry." So anyway, that project, blah blah blah, like they really
you
like.
know, and I love that you're bringing this up. And the reason why I love that you're bringing this up so much is because it's bringing to light for me an experience that I've been having that I haven't really been able to articulate. And it's because divorce is such a common
Um,
thing that when you're talking to people about it, you may be talking to people that are 5 years out divorced, 10 years out divorced, 20 years out divorced. They may have been divorced 3, 4,
yeah,
2, 3, 4 times.
yeah.
And so as you're explaining this to a person, I'm finding that I'm having this conversation with people. I'm going through a divorce, I'm moving through a divorce, and I'm dealing with people at various stages of it.
Mm-hmm.
And people that are further along can kind of be a little bit like, okay, yeah, like kind of get through it, because they're at like a further place in it where they've already met their their next spouse, or they're really excited about their single life, and so like I feel like in that space you almost can kind of get a little bit more of that, okay, come on, wrap this up, move on, than you even do in like a space where somebody dies or passes away.
Sure,
Because
yeah.
so many people, have gone through divorce and like gotten through the other side. And in some respects, because it's not death, it's like, okay, well, life goes on, and so that one is a space where I've had that experience, I feel like, a lot, where I feel like people can almost sort of rush you to getting to a place of okayness around divorce, almost more so than they do with death, because they're just like, okay, so your marriage ended, boo-hoo, people get divorced every day. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm still like, I'm still
Yeah.
devastated.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also this idea of trauma and grief, people are like, oh God, everyone is so overused and all this language. And I'm like, well, it's extremely subjective, the experience of trauma and the experience of grief. So your divorce, someone else's divorce may have been amicable or a hardship, but manageable. And other people's divorces could really be an extreme grieving process, a loss of the life that you thought you were going to have with this
Oh yeah,
person.
my divorce was a complete decimation of my life. It wasn't like I kept my same job, I lived in my same house. No, like I lost the entirety. I even lost all of my possessions because I
Mm.
hired a moving company and they were fraudulent and they stole everything that I had. So I lost
Oh,
everything.
oh my God.
I lost
Oh my gosh.
everything. I lost my entire life in my divorce. My whole life was decimated.
Mm.
So, and for some people, like you said, it's amicable, or, they were able to retain, most, of what their life kind of held before the divorce, and they kind of just lost the spouse. And I hate to even say just lost the spouse, because
Hmm.
even the loss of the spouse is major, even if all of the other facets of your life, remain in place.
Hmm. Wow. So I'm so sorry to hear that. I mean, that's really huge, and I think like you're speaking about this loss of identity, right? That is so particular around um, being a couple, and then the dissolution of the couple, and having a life that really revolves around another person, healthy or not healthy, debatable, but and then really being cast off, and like we were saying earlier, like kind of you're like off-roading, all of a sudden the GPS was like, make a left here. And you're like, this isn't really a road. Wait, am I going? And you're
Right.
like, all of a sudden you're really left adrift to figure out who you are as a singular person again. And you
Hmm.
may, like maybe you met your partner in your 20s or maybe a young adulthood, and maybe now it's a decade later and you have children and you're like, who am I now? Like that's a long time that has passed.
For me, it was 2 decades later. My husband and I got married when I was 21,
Wow.
and we were together for 17 years when we split up.
Hmm.
So, I mean, we grew up, alongside each other.
Mhm.
And so, like, I feel like I said, I was so tuned into our collective trajectory,
Mhm.
that I had completely almost checked out of my individual
Hmm.
trajectory. And honestly, didn't even know what that looked like,
Hmm.
because I connected with him at such a young age that I didn't really have a period of time of sitting and thinking about where do I want my life to go. It was just, where do I want our lives to go?
And so, and again, I guess also, that self identity was also connected to you being a mother. So, like the two main identities for you were probably a wife and mother. And then
Mhm.
Evita was probably like, okay, maybe she like takes a dance class every once in a while or does something.
Really, right. And the funny thing is, if you had to ask me that was what was happening, I would have been like, oh no. And because I am a relatively self-aware person, and so I just was not aware of how transposed those identities were with my core self. I really had like no I didn't. I was just like, oh, like, you know, I didn't know how, like I said, how much there was a fusing of those identities. And, you know, like I said, I still did the things that I wanted to do and dressed how I wanted to dress. And I was very intentional about like not losing myself in being a wife and not losing myself in being a mother. But I don't think that's the same as, like, I didn't think about just what do I want? You know, where do I want what do I want to be able to say about my life? Those weren't thoughts
They're
that I
so
really
intertwined
had.
with
They were so intertwined.
intertwined.
Yeah. Like I said, so transposed, so fused that there was no separation for me. And now that those, and I still hold those identities. I mean, I don't necessarily hold the identity of his wife anymore. Like that one is done. So that identity is dead, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that one exists in memory and, you know, the halls of memory. Whereas, you know, my motherhood identity is still very much alive. It's just much more in the background than it was in the foreground, simply by way of me not being in proximity of my children, you know, because they live across the country.
Yes.
So it's still there. It's just not as prevalent.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And so it's like, what do I want and what do I need? And how do I want to move through life when this identity is not as strong as it used to be, you know? It's not one of those like those first layers. It's like a little bit further back in the, you know, now.
Right. Right. So going back to kind of this sort of permission to grieve, right? We talked about this a little bit earlier. Um, I know that for myself, I went through a divorce a long time ago, and you know, I questioned like, well, this person is having a harder time with it than I am, so I shouldn't be grieving as much. And it was like almost like all of these reasons and the permissions felt very confused. And like, do I have permission to grieve even if the relationship was bad? Do I have permission to grieve even though I'm the one that left? Do I have permission to grieve even though I have another partner, which maybe would be the case for you? I'm wondering if people were like, yeah, but you're, you know, you're polyamorous. You just can, you know, you have somebody else. So how does that, I'm curious how you kind of navigated that for yourself, if there were any of those conditions of like permission to grieve.
I think the ways in which I didn't allow myself permission to grieve came in the form of maybe not liking like who I became as I was grieving.
Hmm.
And
Or
so like,
maybe even like, I don't have permission to grieve because my kids are dealing with things, you know, my kids are
yeah,
dealing with
that
people
one's
about.
yeah, I don't have permission to grieve because I have to be strong for my kids. I think sometimes I didn't want to give myself permission to grieve because there was a part of me that was like, well, you know, he's not busted up about it, so I don't want, you know, him to see me being busted up about it. So don't you dare, you know, like, don't you dare, like, you know, cry about this thing being lost, you know, because you don't want to show him that, you know, you're sad about this. He's not sad about it, you know.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there are so many different ways and so many very individual ways that others don't allow us the space to grieve, and that we also don't allow ourselves the space to grieve. I think that can vary from person to person. It's like, what are the ways in the life that I don't feel like my external reality allows me to grieve? You know, I have to go to work. I have children that I have to take care of. You know, my you know, friends or my family are not as emotionally intelligent as I would like them to be, and so they keep trying to rush me through this process, or they want me to get back to the me that's happy and that they enjoy, or, you know, it connects
You're
them
such a
so much.
buzzkill now.
Right, you're such a buzzkill now, or like I said, that struggle with empathy, or they care about me, and I think we think a lot of that comes from malice. Some of it comes from our family. These I'm talking about, and I'm feeling emotion in my chest. You know, the people around us, they care about us and they love us and they don't want to see us sad. And so it's not that they're rushing us through our grief because they don't care about us or they're cruel. It's because their hearts are breaking for us, you know?
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
want us to be better. They want us to feel better because their hearts are breaking. They don't like seeing us in pain. And so some of that rushing can come from that space. And so what are the ways that my external reality doesn't give me permission to grieve? And then what are the internal ways that I don't give myself permission to grieve? Because like I said, you know, I feel guilt because I ended the relationship. And so why am I sad about this? I'm the one that initiated this. I feel guilt, or like you said, my partner is going through a harder time. And so I want to cede the grief space to them because they clearly are struggling with this a lot more than I am. Or like I said, you know, I don't want this person to they don't get the vulnerability of my grief and the vulnerability of witnessing my grief. And so I'm not going to give myself permission to grieve because don't you know, I don't want them to know that that's the impact that they had on me. And so I feel like there's, an understanding that like we have to examine the ways our external reality doesn't support our, doesn't give permission for us to grieve, or what ways do we feel our external reality doesn't give us permission to grieve. And then what are the internal ways that we don't give ourselves permission to grieve?
You said that so beautifully. Thank you so much. And I'm curious how it was like being in non-monogamy. I'm not sure the nature of your non-monogamous relationships when you were in the midst of divorce, but I imagine for some people that are practicing non-monogamy or polyamory, relationships end and there's a grieving process while you might be in another relationship at the same time. And that sort of maybe paradoxical nature of like
it really, really was, because at the time I had a partner. My former spouse had two partners. I had one. And it was a relatively new relationship. We had really just started seeing each other. And so we were in the throes of just like, oh my God, you're the most wonderful person in the world,
Wow.
And weirdly, my current relationship, that was still a relationship that I had at the time, gave me like perspective for my former spouse making the decision to separate, that allowed me to be a little bit more in acceptance of it. Because one of the things he said when he broke up with me was he no longer subscribes to the belief that romantic relationships should feel hard. And I was like, yep, because my relationship with my current partner, there was so much ease in connection, so much ease in our relationship. And granted, it was newer, but even now that we've been together for 4 years, we're long distance, but I still would categorize that relationship as a relationship of ease. Not that it doesn't have its hard moments or its challenges or its conflict, but the ease with which we connect to each other and the ease with which we move in and out of our relationship space with each other is such a stark contrast to how challenging it was. Like with my husband, we loved each other very much, but our relationship had always felt like trying to make the East meet the West.
Wow.
And so it was very perplexing at times, like being in this like new relationship space with this other person where there's all this ease and lightness and sweetness, and then being in all this anguish in my marriage ending, to the point where like I had a moment where I was like, okay, do I need to break up with my current partner? Because I felt so like I felt a sense of like rejection to my core, and I felt so broken and so just like out of service that I was like, okay, I just don't need to be with anybody, And so there were moments where I thought like, okay, do I need to break up with my partner, my current partner, because like I am just a wreck and a mess and just not good for like, put a like an out of order sign like on this person, like, like I should not be performing
turn off your taxi light.
Right, any romantic relationship functions, period. Like, because I'm completely out of order.
It's an interesting maybe like conundrum to be like, okay, in these moments, do we need to go inward and sort of like give ourselves a space of not being in any romantic relationships to heal, or could the additional relationships actually provide a space for healing? I guess it's really up to the individual.
It's very case by case. I think it's relationship by relationship. I think it's individual by individual. In my case, the maintenance of the romantic relationship has been very healing.
Mm.
Because he really has been a very consistent relationship space when I needed consistency, because so much of my life was in such a state of flux.
Mm.
And so for that, I'm very, very grateful. I can honestly say that I don't know how I would have gotten through this time if it wasn't for his presence in my life, and his presence in my life in the particular way that he is. And so in that regard, it has been a useful and wonderful and nurturing and healing for me. But I could absolutely see where someone can be like, I can't have any of that. And I can definitely say that in the other facets of my life, I've turned off a lot of that. So he and I are long distance. He lives across the country back in California. And I've kind of entered into a period where I'm not really dating. I'm not really trying to connect to people. And that is intentional, because I'm like, I feel like I need that time. So even in the context of me having a romantic relationship, I still am in a space of, kind of deep sort of drawing in.
Yeah. Still maybe mourning some of the aspects of relating. I remember that maybe the first year in for me, like after a divorce, there was a lot of ceremonial, like, mourning stages, which was like, oh, this is the first time we're not doing this together. This is the first birthday without him. This is the first holiday without them. This is the first, I don't know, like, whatever. And the first time that you understand that they're started dating someone else or with someone else, and you're like, there's a lot of firsts that you need to get through in your mourning process. Um, and to kind of, like, almost like lay the new foundation of, like, all right, this is the new reality. Okay.
Right. That first anniversary, I remember the first Valentine's Day, without and me and my former spouse, we made a big deal out of anniversaries. We made a big deal out of Valentine's Day. I'm
Mm.
very into romance, and so he was very much that way too. So our first Valentine's Day, because we broke up in September. So the first Christmas where we weren't together. I remember I'm gonna tell a funny story, and it's actually probably not gonna paint me in the best light, but I super don't care. So it was Christmas. I'm like, picture it, like Sophia from the Golden Girls, picture it.
Sicily, 1923.
December 2020, San Diego, and so and it's the first Christmas not together. We were supposed to, me and the kids were supposed to go to New Jersey to go see my mom. And my daughter gets diagnosed with COVID. And so we can't fly away literally the day before we were supposed to leave. And I am like super into Christmas. Christmas is a big deal. I decorate my house. I literally, like, I had a goal of having 31 campy, just garish Christmas outfits to wear for the entire month of December. Like, it's a whole thing.
Oh my gosh, you sound like a fun mom.
Yeah. We're gingerbread cookies and gingerbread men and gingerbread decorating and all of the Christmas movies and Charlie Brown Christmas, all of that. It's a big deal. And going to see Christmas lights, it's a big deal. And so I just love how campy and garish and extra Christmas is, because I'm campy and garish and extra. So it's our first Christmas, and I had decorated the house, and me and the kids are supposed to get away and go see my mom for Christmas. And my husband was having his other partner come and spend like a week with him while we were gone. And this particular partner I didn't care for. He had one partner that I absolutely love. She and I are still very good friends to this day. And then at that time he had one partner that I was not a fan of. And that was the one that was coming. And I got so upset about her coming that I took all the decorations down in the house, all of them, because I was like, you guys are not going to be Baby It's Cold and Outside and on my couch with my decorations.
Oh,
nope.
yeah.
And so I took them all down. And then my daughter gets COVID and we couldn't go to New Jersey, and I had to put them all back up because we ended up spending Christmas in California. But like all of these like little milestones of like, this is the first time that I'm celebrating my birthday and we're not together. There's just all these little, like, the first time I have to sign, documents and say divorce and check off divorced.
Oh yes, right.
Like,
all
I
these
still
all
have
these
not
things
done that yet. I think I have like once.
All
Yeah,
these
because
things
my
that kind of catch you by surprise, and you were saying, like, wanted to ask your ex something, and you had how long you had to scroll through the text to
right,
see,
when
like,
there was
where's that.
before, he would be right at the top, and now I'm, like, having to
Yeah.
scroll way down to find him because we don't talk every day,
Mhm.
there's sometimes weeks
Yeah.
that go by that we don't talk, and so all of these little, like, tiny reminders of, "Oh, this thing that took up such a large space in my life is no more."
Yeah, they're now like a bit player in your life, which is very strange, right?
Yeah, yeah, that
Def
now you're just somebody that I used to know, you know? I don't know what his day-to-day routine is like. I
Mhm,
think about that,
mhm,
and I'm like, sometimes I maybe need to call him to ask him something about the kids, and I'm like, Is he at work? Is he not at work?" I don't know, because
mm,
I don't know what his day-to-day routine is like. And not
yeah,
everybody has this experience. Some people stay very close to their, spouses and those things and whatever, but, my experience is a lot of the relevance that I had for him is gone, and he really is
mhm,
kind of just somebody that I sort of kind of used to know.
mm, yeah. And I would love to talk more also about a particular grief around the breaking of a family unit, that and your unique situation where, I mean, I guess it's more common where the, mother typically has at least half or more custody, but you actually had to move away from the family unit, and the loss of the unit, and the shift of the prevalence in your children's life. You're still their mom, but you had said, like, the relevance that you had in your life, and I can't imagine the grief that comes with that, because you're supposed, the narrative is like you're supposed to be the person that knows everything about your kids, the mother
Right.
attunes to everyone.
And it's actually
Oh.
pretty funny because as you're talking about that, I'm the one that initiated that the kids go with him. And so
Mm,
that space about giving yourself the permission to grieve, I'm the one that said, I literally told him when he broke up with me, as I said, "You're getting the kids." I said, "I don't
mm,
subscribe to the notion that because I'm their mom, that they automatically come with me." I said, "You're 50% of their DNA." I said, "I did
mm,
not sign up to be a single mother.
mm,
And so you made this decision and you take the children." That's what I told
mm,
him. That literally did.
mm, mhm,
And he was like, "Okay." And he's a great father, so it's not like this thing where I was like, okay, like I was, kind of dooming them to this, terrible. He's a one incredible father. He really is. I used to say about my husband, to see him with his children is to fall in love with him because he
mm,
is an incredible dad. And so, but yeah, I was the one that initiated you're going to get the full custody. I said, this is not, this is not my story. And I love my children, but I don't want to be a single parent. And I didn't initiate this. And so, no. And so there is that space of going, do I have permission to grieve, even though I'm the one that made that decision? And also, it wasn't entirely just, about me. When I thought about what was most optimal for I feel like what was the highest chance for their most optimal happiness, which
mhm,
choice was, it was definitely them staying with their dad and staying in California. But I had spent most of my marriage as an at-home mom for the most part, and I would have
mm,
part-time jobs and things like that, but he largely supported me. And him continuing to support me just changed how I experienced like what was happening to us. And I became keenly aware that I had to like really get out from under his support. And I
mm,
wasn't at a place where I could just go and support myself. And so I, made the decision to move back home with my family. And my family happened to live in New Jersey across the country.
mm, mhm,
And I knew that I didn't want to, if I took my kids away, it would be too much loss. And so I said, I think the best thing is for them to stay with their dad. And so far that has proven to be accurate, that I made the
mhm,
right choice on that.
yeah,
But there was a lot of grief in the loss of such a huge portion of my identity, which was mother. I mean, literally, like I said, I was an at-home mom, and I'm still a mom. But that identity is now in the background a little bit and not in the foreground, just by way of proximity. I'm
mhm,
not there every day. I'm not in the house, taking care of them,
mhm,
taking them back and forth to school, making dinner, washing their clothes. I now visit my children and my children visit me,
mm,
as opposed to living with them, and living, alongside them day to day.
mm. Yeah, and you had spoken about this keen like sadness of maybe not knowing the intricacies of their lives as
Right.
well as you did
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah, there's so many little moments that I don't have with the children anymore. Like I was talking about, my son got his first job recently, and I had to witness it via photos, that their
Mm,
dad sent me. I wasn't there. I didn't pick him up from his first day of work. And I was one of those kinds of mom. Every
mhm,
play, every project, every, thing they had going on,
mm,
every award ceremony, I was there.
mm,
And so moving from being that to getting this information secondhand
mm,
was such an adjustment, and this loss of relevance in my children's lives. Not that they don't love me or they don't appreciate me as their mom, but I'm not there. I'm not there in the way that I once was. And so that's been difficult to deal with, and I've definitely cried many tears about just not feeling as close to my children and as connected to them and
mm.
as relevant to them. And you already deal with a little bit of that. I have teenagers, so as your teens get older, you're not their sun and moon and stars anymore, like you are when
Yeah,
they're younger.
yeah.
So you're already dealing with that movement through your relevance to your children as they're maturing. But like now it's even more pronounced because I
Mhm.
now live across the country from them, and so I'm not a day-to-day presence in their lives in the same ways.
Yeah. And reestablishing like the kind of being like the main character in your life again, like reestablishing this sort of singular identity as maybe the predominant thing on your daily life, and the discomfort with that, and also really that that you're keenly aware that you're doing life alone sometimes.
Right. I realize how much what I did for myself came from the context of needing to do that for someone else. And when I would have
Mm.
company, when I clean the most, when I cook the most, is when I have someone coming over.
Sure, yeah.
And when it's just me here, I'm a lot more lax about whether or not those things get done. I mean, I do clean my
I'm eating
home, but
hummus and carrots. Like that's what
right,
I
exactly, right. Like
couple of
I'm like,
nuts. Like that's
yeah,
dinner.
I'm so much more keenly aware of how much
Mhm.
I structure my life around doing something because I'm thinking of somebody else.
Yeah.
And than I am about thinking about myself, because so much of my life was thinking about someone else.
Mhm.
And so I'm not practiced and not skilled at thinking about, what do I want? What do I need? How would I like my day to go? How would I like my weekend to go? Like, what would I like to say that I'm doing in 2 months, in 3 months, in 6 months?
Mhm.
So much of that thought process that folded in so many other people, my husband, my kids, and now it's just me thinking about me, and man, it is very challenging.
Mm.
It's really hard. And I thought, I'm just super self-aware person and I don't struggle to identify my needs and my
Mm.
wants. And I'm actually realizing that that's not entirely accurate.
Yes, I remember kind of feeling that way too. That I don't have children, but I was married, and I spent a lot of time single. Coming in and out of relationships, and like, who was I going? How was I going to treat myself as a single person versus someone in relationship, and why did that have to be different? And I spent a lot of time saying like, okay, like I'm going to treat myself in the most beautiful way possible, eating the best foods, taking care of my body, taking the trips that I want, because I don't really want to wait for someone else for me to live my best life. Like I want to live my best life as a single person, and then also allow someone to come in and have them see like, yeah, this is the way that I live my life no matter what. I live this way because I don't have to turn it on when someone comes into my home.
Right. Yeah. I saw something somewhere, read something somewhere. Is most of us live in like this sort of like waiting pattern where we're just like, I'm just
Mm,
waiting for this other person and then I'll start living. I'm
mm,
waiting for my
mhm,
soulmate. I'm waiting for, my spouse or my, my next boo.
mhm,
And then once this person arrives, I'm gonna start living, I can live. And so like, how do I not how do I hold that I want to, because these are experiences I do want to have. I'd love to be partnered again. I'd love to be married again. And so like, how do I hold the both end of the longing and wanting those experiences, while also not slipping into waiting, in order to live? And how do I go, how do I make myself my partner, my spouse, my lover, in the space where like I may not have one, or I may not have one in such a prominent way like I did when I was married.
I think that is another definition of grief for myself, which is to own the longing. To say like, I long for this. I don't have to convince myself that I don't need it, or like I own the longing of my loss. Like, I wanted this so much. I wanted this to be different. That is like the exquisiteness of sort of grief, is that I really let myself feel all of that longing. So
Yeah, and that
I think
longing
that,
is painful. It's
Mhm.
such a resonant, like it's such a resonant, rich feeling. It's an intense one. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's one that I struggle with and grapple with, is owning the longing.
Yeah, because I think we fear
Yeah.
that it will like swallow us. I mean, I've had
Mhm.
that fear in like doing, like therapy and somatic therapy. I was like, my sadness feels so big that I'm afraid it's going to sort of, I'm not gonna like come up for air again.
So I had an
And
experience like that. I did a training for to learn how to facilitate psychedelic cannabis experiences. And it was like right after we made the choice to or he made the choice to separate. And so it was fresh, really, really fresh. And I remember we sat in ceremony in the training, and the medicine spoke to me, and it was like, okay, Vita, like, we're gonna take some time and we're gonna be sad about this. It was like, and go. Like, it's literally like
Mhm.
that was literally the words that I heard. And and I had not been doing that because I was afraid that it was just like a black hole, and it was just gonna swallow me up and like obliterate me. And that was all I was going to be, was a black hole of sadness.
Mhm.
And I mean, I just began to weep and
Mhm.
weep and weep. And I'm just like those like shoulder
Mhm.
racking, like your chest heaving
Mhm.
sobs, because I was so afraid to allow myself to feel the longing and feel the sadness of, I wish that we were still together. I wish that he still wanted me to be my husband. I wish that I still had a husband, or had someone who wanted to be my husband. I don't even care if it's not him, So like,
Mhm.
there was
Mhm.
so much longing, so much longing. And I was afraid, and I still feel fear, and letting myself experience the longing.
Yeah. Well, it's just such an act of surrender, to
Mhm.
feel like I'll get pulled under by this, but I'll hit the ground. I don't know where the ground is, but I'm going to trust that there's ground somewhere to kind of push me back up.
Right,
But it's
exactly.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right. That I will, something will offer me buoyancy that won't allow me to drown,
Yeah.
you know?
Yes. Oh, it's so beautiful. And then inside of that, that's where the beauty and the transformation, I think, comes.
Yeah, it's the hope that I'm going to resurface again, that I'm going to be
Hmm.
able to get back to a place where I can take a full, deep, rich breath of air.
Hmm.
And that I'm not just going to suffocate,
Hmm.
in this sadness.
Yeah. It's kind of said that these like transformational processes, they always come with pain. Like this awakening consciousness, you can't sort of awaken consciousness without pain. Like you think of like childbirth, like you're literally going from uh you know one thing to another, and you're becoming a mother, and inside of that is this birthing process that allows you to transform from singular to mother.
Right.
And it comes with a lot of it comes with this sort of unknown. You don't know how it's going to be. You don't know how the labor is going to be. You have to sort
You
of
don't know how
trust
long it's gonna
it,
take.
but you have to trust that at the end a baby's gonna come out, like
Right.
with the agreement. And you have to sort of like really like believe that you will be okay.
Mhm.
And you will come out of this very different, you will come out of this different, but you will be okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
So just,
so in 2016 I had gastric bypass surgery.
mm,
And as I was going through the process, I remember saying to myself, there will come a day where I am grateful that I made this decision. That day
mm.
is not today, and that is okay, you know? And so I've adapted that or modified it, you know, to my divorce experience and go, there will come a day where I am grateful that this happened to me. That
Mhm.
day is not today, and that is okay, you know?
Yes,
And
beautiful.
sort of having faith that eventually um I will be able to you know, I struggle to say, oh, I'm just going to be happy that this happened. Some people never get to happiness, you know, that it ever happened. But at
Yeah.
least if you can get to a space of peace and reconciliation of it as an event on your timeline.
Mhm. Yes.
And so if I could just focus on getting to peace about the fact that it is an event on my timeline, and you know, it was an event on my timeline that led me to the timeline that I'm in now, or the, you know, the scene in my life that I'm in now. And so I
Mhm.
understand that it's necessity. I understand its purpose, or I'm at peace with its necessity. I'm at peace with its purpose, because sometimes we don't even understand it. You know, there's some things where you're like,
Mhm.
I just don't understand why it happened. And so I think sometimes looking for understanding can hinder us, but it's just like, I'm at peace with, this was an event that is on my timeline, and, you know, in the succession of my life, you know, this had to happen, or this did happen, and trying to get to that space. But, you know, for me, you know, I am lofty spiritually in the sense that I want to shoot for happiness. You know, I want to shoot
Mm.
for getting to a space to where I'm like, I believe, and I trust, and I have faith, and I have hope, that there will become a day that I will not only be at peace about this will happen, but that I will actually experience joy. And that
Mm.
overall, you know, my reflection on that will be one of joy. I'm grateful that this happened, because it was an event on my timeline that led me to this new existence that I'm in, that I'm so grateful for. And so yeah.
Mm. It's such a nice way to sort of like feel like we're kind of coming towards the end of our conversation, and um I'm so grateful that you feel like you're maybe because I felt in the moments when I was in my grief, I felt like I was the most poignant in terms of connecting to my feelings and talking about my sadness, as opposed to it being like this abstract thing that I kind of remembered about myself. But really, there's a certain eloquence that we get when we're kind of in the depths of this. And I just really want to thank you for that.
Yeah, Ram Dass has a quote that about death, where he says that, like, you need not fear death in order to, like, enjoy life. You know, death
Mm,
imbues life with a richness, and I feel like grief does the same thing. You know, that the process of grief, it if you really tap in and tune into it, and you don't dissociate from it, you don't, you know,
hmm
you don't like kind of keep it out at bay, but you really get, you know, you really embody your process, and stay deeply embodied in your process. It imbues life with such a richness. It really
hmm
does. It really does. The depth of feeling that I have now, and I've always been a very sensitive person. I've always been a very deep feeling person, but the depth of feeling that I have now, because of experiencing such a tremendous loss, it's probably the biggest loss I've ever had in my life.
Mm,
Is the loss of my marriage. I'm going to say this is the biggest space of loss that I've ever
mm,
experienced at this juncture
mm.
in my life. And it imbues life with a richness, that, you know, life just, I don't want to say that it didn't have, but I don't think it was as resonant and as poignant as it is today, and as it is in
Yeah,
this moment.
yeah. Even with, if the richness of maybe like if you're painting a picture, you need sort of shadow to enhance the light. So really, it is a part of that, like bringing the depth in. It's not always about painting with light colors. It's also about building the depth with some of the
Right.
darkness as well.
Hmm.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Well, I would love for people to know more about you, Evita. Like, what do you offer? How do you help people? What would you like to offer
Um,
to the community here?
So I am a coach or I say a peer support guide. I do coaching and guidance for folks living in non-monogamous relationships. That's generally where I focus. I've occasionally had people come to me just for general relationship stuff. I actually have a lot of monogamous followers, believe it or not. And I've definitely had
I
people.
imagine, yeah.
Yeah, I have people that are like, I'm monogamous, but I just really enjoy your take and your perspective. So you can find me on Instagram at LaVitaLoca34. I do a lot of posting of relationship content, non-monogamy content. You can also reach out to me there if you want individual coaching and guidance. If you're in a non-monogamous relationship, or even if you have just a relationship issue that you want to bounce off someone. I also have a book coming out in October.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's a Polyamory Devotional. It'll be coming out October 23rd. That is available for pre-order on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble. And so, yeah, so you can see my content on Instagram at LaVitaLoca34. You can also reach out to me there. And on my Facebook page at LaVitaLoca Sawyers if you want individual counseling. Or rather not counseling, individual guidance and coaching. And then, like I said, I have a book coming out on the 23rd of October called the Polyamory Devotional. So that's how you can find me.
We'll have to find, if there's a link, we'll have to post it in the
Yes,
comments
I'll
later.
send you the link so you can post it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And for everyone else that's watching, I also love to support people in their relationships. But I also really am a fan of connecting to the inner relationship with ourselves and connecting back to the body so that we can build a healthy relationship with ourselves so that we can offer the best to our partners in the world. So if you're interested, you can connect with me for Facebook or Instagram. And I want to thank Evita so much for talking to us on this beautiful topic. And we will see you later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was great.
Cheers. Bye.